For years, Chinese watches were dismissed as cheap knockoffs, and now they're taking the watch world by storm. But are they actually worth your money? If you are new here, welcome to my channel. My name is Ricardo Hawkes, and here we talk about watches and nothing else. So, Chinese watches. I'll be honest, I've bought a few, mostly out of curiosity, but some have really surprised me. What's weird is, 5 years ago, I didn't own any, and I didn't know anyone else that owned any either. But today feels different. Something has changed. Now, when we look at China as a country, they're doing some really gargantuan things. I've always wanted to use that word. According to recent data, China produces and exports more watches than anyone else. In 2022, for example, China exported over 540 million watches. Now, that is just an obscene figure. That's around 1.6 million watches every single day. So how much money is that? Well, in 2025, the Chinese watch market is projected to generate a revenue of $20.5 billion. They are the #1 powerhouse when it comes to watch production, and there is no catching them up. What's really fascinating is China's expanding middle class is significantly driving the luxury watch market as well. Morgan Stanley has recently reported that Chinese buyers have contributed to almost 30% of the worldwide sales of Swiss watches in 2023. So in 2023, almost a third of all watches made in Switzerland were purchased by China. Okay, so now we know that China produces the most watches, and they also buy a large portion of the ones that are made in Switzerland as well. This was inevitably going to lead to Chinese factories becoming better at doing what they do. We already know they have these sheer numbers to pump out watches, so all they needed was to increase their skills and quality of production. And this has been happening slowly over time, which has led to the rise of brands that you may have heard of. Steel Dive, Seagull, Addies Dive, San Martin, Seager Design. These brands are now creating watches that are beginning to match their Swiss counterparts. The crystals have improved drastically. Dial printing, engine turning and painting techniques are all now up to scratch. Many Chinese brands now use these same quality metals. Movements are improved and becoming more and more reliable. So what you could end up with is a watch that has all the necessary components of a $1,000 watch, but these are being sold for much, much less. Take the San Martin SN0129 for example. It's got sapphire glass, anti-reflective coating. It's built with 316L stainless steel. It has a Seiko NH34 GMT movement. The dial and finishing are really top-notch, and the bracelet is sturdy and good quality. This watch can be found for $250 to $300, and I can't help but think how much this watch could cost if it was produced and sold by a Swiss company. Another big change that has happened in the last 10 years is our ability to access these watches. With the rise of wholesaler websites such as Aliexpress, Alibaba and DHgate, anyone can buy these watches and have them shipped direct to their houses. So when we talk about the qualities of each brand, it's important to remember that there is a spectrum, just as there is with Swiss watches. You won't always buy a cheaper watch from China and be happy with it. It might break, which means it will need repairing. There are still things like quality control issues, shipping times and lack of customer support, which haven't yet been refined. On the flip side, some Chinese brands today are producing some really premium watches. Take Atelier Wen for example, a Chinese brand that has created the Perception, one of the most beautiful steel sports watches you can buy today. On their website, they even say, "The feats of Chinese watchmaking and artisanship often go unnoticed in a world preoccupied with European luxury," which is exactly my point here. It is no longer going unnoticed, and people are slowly waking up to what brands in China can create. So, should you buy a Chinese watch? Well, let's discuss the upsides. Chinese watches are often much cheaper. You can likely afford 3, 5, sometimes even 10 watches for the price of one Swiss watch. So you're getting more toys to play with. This is a dream for the average buyer on a budget because you suddenly have access to styles you didn't have before. Variety is also a big factor here. Lots of Chinese brands love to experiment with watches. Maybe they're using fun custom dials. Maybe they're merging two styles together, which you've never seen before. Maybe you can finally sample a meteorite dial on the cheap, or experience what it's like to have a moon swatch for the first time. And as previously mentioned, new luxury watches coming out of China are also a big positive. China are creating high-end watches just like the Atelier Wen Perception. and it feels like we are just touching the top of the iceberg in terms of what's to come. So let's talk about the downsides to buying a Chinese watch today. The buying experience is often not as exciting as buying a Swiss watch. Chinese watches shipped overseas don't have a storefront, so you can't try these watches on. You can't see them in person, and you can't talk to a representative. They just arrive, and you either like them or not. Many of these watches also lack the proper story, a narrative which charm you into buying. They simply just exist. Quality control can still be a big issue. Due to the sheer number of watches being made, many can pass through the net, as it were, leaving defects and inconsistencies to be discovered by none other than us, the buyers. Resale value can be a problem too. With Swiss timepieces, we can often get 60, 70, even 80% of our money back when we sell a watch, assuming we've looked after it. This is because they are sought after. They have a strong brand image. Chinese watches, on the other hand, haven't yet been able to solve this issue. And I think that ties in with brand image as well. These companies don't have interesting histories. They don't have good brand recognition and reputation. If anything, their histories are just beginning, so they haven't yet had time to build upon this. Remember when I said China are producing more watches than anyone else in the world? Well, that's not necessarily a good thing. Flooding the market with sheer numbers means you devalue your product. Something isn't rare when there's 2 million of them, as opposed to Swiss watches where there may only be 50,000. It's potentially death by saturation. There's also the issue with irregular design language. While a select few Chinese brands are innovating, many still rely on copying famous designs from watches like the Submariner, the Speedmaster, the Royal Oak, and so on. For a brand to truly flourish, it needs to carve out its own identity, which means finding a design, an aesthetic, and sticking with it. So what's next for Chinese watches? In 10 years' time, China will still probably be the major exporter of watches. It will still generate the most revenue from doing this. But in order to truly earn the respect of all of us, they need to continue to work on the issues previously mentioned. Things like quality control, brand image, and customer support. Now, if they do this, they may have to increase prices, which also runs the risk of people losing interest and just going back to Swiss. Remember, the main reason that a lot of us have probably bought a Chinese watch is because of the price. I think if China can continue to create brands like Atelier Wen that innovate and hold a high standard, we may see a real shift in the market, which won't be good for the Swiss industry. Brands like Rolex and Omega will probably be fine, yes, but micro brands and smaller Swiss brands really do run the risk of losing more market share. But I would be lying if I said I didn't want to see a brand like Rolex being born in China, the birth of a new super premium brand that isn't Swiss. Now that would be exciting. Okay guys, so this has been a really fascinating topic to discuss, and I do really value all your comments here. What do you think about Chinese watches, and do you own any? What about the future of the Chinese and Swiss watch industry? Be sure to leave a comment, and as always, thank you for watching. I will see you next time.